we have just completed learning about a React component. We have seen how we can create a React component by defining a class and subclassing the React component class. Now, in the next module, we'll learn about other kinds of React components. But for a class component in a React application, every class component has a life cycle associated with it. What exactly is the life cycle? Let's briefly talk about that. As we realize, a React application is made up of multiple React components that are connected together to form the entire screen of your React application's view. Now, each React component, as and when it is required, will be created by React and then added into the DOM of your entire application. So every time a React component needs to be included into your application's view, then the component that hosts the specific part of the view will be created and added into the overall React component hierarchy. Now, so a component passes through what we call as the life cycle for the component. Now, initially the component doesn't exist. Then the component gets created, and then once it is created, then it can be mounted into your React application at an appropriate point in the hierarchy of components. Then it will exist at that point for a period of time, and then subsequently maybe you no longer require that view, and so at that point the component can be removed from this hierarchy. So that will be an unmounting of the component. So as you realize, a component passes through a life cycle of creation, mounting, and then existing in the hierarchy, then unmounting, and then disappearing at that point. Now, in every stage of this life cycle, React provides several lifecycle hooks or lifecycle methods that can be invoked to perform certain operations. So again, to summarize what I have just discussed, a React component goes through the following lifecycle stages: the mounting of the component after creation, and in between, if the view of the component needs to be updated, then it gets updated. So at that point, it'll be in the updating stage. And then when the component is no longer needed, it'll be unmounted from the hierarchy. So that'll be the unmounting stage of the lifecycle for your component. Now, as I mentioned, there are several lifecycle methods that are available in each stage: the mounting stage, the updating stage, and the unmounting stage. So these lifecycle methods will be invoked by React as your component is passing through these stages of its lifecycle. Let's examine some of these lifecycle methods. Later on, we will understand how we can make use of these lifecycle methods to perform certain operations required when a component is passing through a particular stage of its lifecycle. Let's first talk about the lifecycle methods that are available when the component is getting mounted into the overall hierarchy of the React components. Now, in the mounting stage, these methods that are available, the constructor, get derived state from props, render, and component did mount methods are invoked when an instance of a component is created and inserted into the DOM. So at that point, when it gets mounted into the DOM, at that point, these methods are going to be called. The constructor will be called first, the render will be called then the component did mount will be called, and so the component did mount will be called after your component gets mounted into the DOM, and then the view is rendered into the overall view of your application. Now, if you see some of the older React documentation or some of the older examples, you might also encounter people using another method called component will mount. Now, with React 16.3, this method has been deprecated and you're no longer advised to use this method. From 17.0 onwards, this method will be completely removed from React. So we would desist from using this method in our React application. We will only use the constructor when required. The render method obviously has to be used every single time. The component did mount will be used when you need to execute something after the component gets added into the DOM. Then the get derived state from props will be used if required, although I don't have an example to illustrate that to you. Now, we will look at an example of how we can make use of some of these mounting lifecycle methods by modifying our application that we have been working on to see that these lifecycle methods indeed get called as the component is getting mounted. At a later stage, in another module, we'll come back to the methods that are used when a component is being updated and also when a component is being unmounted. To help you understand how the lifecycle methods are invoked, let's go to our application that we have been working on so far, and in the menu component. Now you see that in the menu component that we have created in our application, the constructor is already included there. So the constructor will be invoked when the menu component is created. So to illustrate to you that indeed this is going to be called, I will put a simple console log statement in there saying menu components constructor is invoked. So that way you can see in the console log that this indeed was called. Now, similarly, I will take this same console log and then we will use it in the render method. So in the render method, I'm going to also invoke the console log. So menu components render is invoked. And let me add in a new method here, new lifecycle method here called component did mount. And this method will be invoked. Again, we'll test to see when this method is invoked. So we'll say component did mount, and then I'll do a console log saying menu component did mount is invoked. Now, I will add this in here just to illustrate to you that these lifecycle methods are indeed being called as the component is getting mounted. So in this example, we see that when our React application gets created, the app.js will mount the menu component into its view. And so at that point, the menu component gets created and added into our overall DOM for our React application. So let's execute this and then watch the console, JavaScript console in our browser to see when these methods are getting invoked. Going to our browser, you see that our application has been rendered just like before. There is no change to the view of our application, but let me open the JavaScript console. So here I'm going to the view developer JavaScript console. If you are using another browser, then you would similarly be able to access the JavaScript console in that browser using a similar approach. Look for the developer tools which are part of your specific browser that you are using. So again, going into the JavaScript console, you can see here that first statement, it says menu component constructor is invoked. Then the next thing that is printed in the console says menu component render is invoked, and then finally menu component did mount is invoked. So you see how these three methods are invoked in that sequence as your component gets mounted into your DOM by your React application. So these methods will allow you to get access to the component at various stages of its creation and mounting into the DOM. And if you need to perform any operation during that period, you can include the appropriate code into the specific location, either in the constructor or in the render or in the component did mount methods. Now, we have already seen that in the constructor, we are initializing the state for the component right within the constructor. So that is one use of the lifecycle method. Similarly, if we want to do something after the component is mounted into the DOM, then we can include that in the component did mount method. Now we will see the use of that in one of the later exercises in the last module of this course. As we are working on our React application, let me also draw your attention to a developer tool that is available for React called as React DevTools, which is available. This is the GitHub repository for it. This is an extension that gets added to your browsers, either Chrome or Firefox, or even available as a standalone app if you would prefer to use it. Now, in my case, since I am using the Chrome browser, I'm going to install the Chrome browser extension and then make use of it within my application. So this is an interesting tool that will be very useful as you're developing your React application, because you can easily watch things. When your React application gets created and rendered, then you can see various aspects of your React application, including the DOM hierarchy, which will enable you to check for any errors. If you encounter any problems in the way the views are rendered, then you can go and check in the React Developer Tools. Let me show you the React Dev Tools for the specific application that we have been working on. Now, before we do that, if you want to add the developer tools, go to the appropriate browser extension there and then add it into your browser. So for Chrome, you go to the Chrome Dev Store and then from there add the extension for Chrome. Similarly for Firefox, if you want to use a standalone app, then you can download that and then make use of it. Now, I find that it is a lot more easy for me to integrate the extension into my Chrome, because I'm already using the console log for watching the JavaScript console, and so the React DevTools will add one more tab to that developer tools window that I bring up at the bottom of my browser, and so it is more convenient for me to use the React DevTools that way. Now, a link to the React DevTools is available in the additional resources of this section. Now, going to my React application. Now, in my React application, right there in the developer tools, I have the React DevTools installed there. So when you open it, you can see the structure of your DOM there. So you can see the app here. Now, the advantage of doing this is that you can go in and watch all the aspects and see all the properties that are being sent to each one of these components. And also, for example, in the menu, you can go into the menu and then see the props that have come to the menu. So you can easily find out whether your props are being correctly passed into the menu item or not, and so on. And then when you click on a particular dish, as you realize, you're going to be rendering that particular dish there. So the details of the dish are shown down below here. And you would also see in the React Developer Tools, you can see the state here. And you can see that the selected dish is initialized to the dish that we just selected there. So that's the advantage of React DevTools. It will allow you to go in and see the different aspects, the different parts of your application, and be able to check to see if you are encountering any errors, if the props are being correctly passed, if the state is correctly initialized. All these can be easily useful while you're developing your React application. So take advantage of the React DevTools to help you track as you develop your React application.